This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Frank Osbaldistone was a young Englishman whose heart beat for literature and poetry. His passion for the written word set him apart from his father's expectations, creating a rift between them that would soon alter the course of Frank's life. The London air hung heavy with the scent of ink and parchment, a perfume that intoxicated Frank as he wandered through the labyrinthine shelves of his favorite bookshop. His fingers, pale and unblemished by manual labor, danced across the spines of leather-bound tomes. Each touch sent a shiver of excitement through him, as if he were caressing the very essence of human knowledge and imagination. Outside, the cobblestone streets echoed with the clatter of horse hooves and the cries of street vendors. But within these hallowed walls, Frank found his sanctuary. The soft rustle of turning pages and the occasional creak of old floorboards created a symphony that soothed his soul. Meanwhile, across town in a grand office overlooking the Thames, William Osbaldistone's quill scratched furiously across ledgers. The sound grated on his nerves, each stroke a reminder of the son who should be learning this trade. William's calloused hands, testament to years of hard work, clenched around the quill. The empire he had built from nothing now teetered on the brink of an uncertain future. As twilight painted the London sky in hues of purple and gold, Frank returned home, his satchel heavy with new literary treasures. The Osbaldistone mansion loomed before him, its windows glowing with warm light that failed to reach the cold pit forming in his stomach. He knew what awaited him inside: disappointment, arguments, and the crushing weight of unfulfilled expectations. The tension between father and son had been building for months, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came on a rain-soaked evening, the patter of droplets against window panes providing a somber backdrop to the confrontation that would change everything. Frank stood in his father's study, surrounded by the trappings of mercantile success. The scent of leather and tobacco hung in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of coins. His heart raced, but his voice remained steady as he declared, "Father, I cannot join the company. My heart lies with the written word, with creating stories that will outlive us both." The words hung in the air like mist, and for a moment all was still. Then William's face contorted, a mask of disappointment and fury. "Very well," he spat, each word dripping with icy disdain. "If you wish to pursue your fanciful dreams, you shall do so far from the comforts of London. You will go to your uncle Hildebrand's estate in Northumberland." The sentence fell like a hammer blow, shattering Frank's world. Northumberland, a name that conjured images of wild, windswept moors and people as hard and unyielding as the land they tilled. It was a far cry from the literary salons and theaters of London that had nurtured his passion. As Frank packed his belongings, each book he placed in his trunk felt like both a badge of honor and a millstone around his neck. His friends gathered to bid him farewell, their concern palpable in hushed whispers and comforting embraces. The city that had been his muse now seemed to be turning its back on him, pushing him out into the unknown. The day of departure dawned gray and foreboding. A fine mist clung to everything, turning the familiar streets into a ghostly landscape. Frank mounted his horse, the animal sensing its rider's apprehension and shifting restlessly beneath him. With a heavy heart and a head full of questions, he urged his steed forward, leaving behind the only world he had ever known. As London's skyline faded into the distance, the countryside unfurled before him like a vast, unwritten page. Rolling hills replaced towering buildings, and the cacophony of city life gave way to the gentle rustling of leaves and the mournful cry of a distant bird. Frank's emotions roiled within him: fear of the unknown, anger at his father's decision, and a tiny, persistent spark of excitement for the adventure that lay ahead. The road stretched before him, a ribbon of uncertainty leading into the mist-shrouded distance. With each hoofbeat, Frank felt himself moving further from his dreams and deeper into a story he never intended to write. As the sun began to set on his first day of travel, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar landscape, a chill ran down Frank's spine. What awaited him in the wilds of Northumberland? And would he ever find his way back to the life he loved? The silhouette of a great house loomed suddenly on the horizon, its jagged outline a stark contrast against the fading light. Could this be Osbaldistone Hall? Frank's heart raced as he urged his tired mount forward, both eager and terrified to reach his destination. As he drew closer, the mist seemed to part, revealing a sight that made his blood run cold. Frank's journey through the rugged Northumberland landscape had been long and tiring. At last, after what seemed like an eternity, he arrived at Osbaldistone Hall, the ancestral home of his uncle, Sir Hildebrand Osbaldistone. As he approached the ancient stone building, a chill ran down his spine. The hall, a looming fortress of weathered granite, stood defiantly against the backdrop of dense, misty forests and rolling hills. It was a stark reminder of how far he'd strayed from the refined streets of London. The air hung heavy with the earthy scent of damp soil and wood smoke, clinging to Frank's clothes as he dismounted his horse. His legs, stiff as boards from the endless ride, nearly gave way beneath him. He stumbled, catching himself on the saddle, and took a moment to survey his new surroundings. The hall towered before him, its walls etched with the stories of centuries past, each crack and crevice a chapter in its long history. Suddenly the silence was shattered by the groan of hinges. The massive oak door swung open, the sound echoing across the courtyard like a gunshot. Out stepped Sir Hildebrand, a mountain of a man with a face as red as a ripe apple and a laugh that could wake the dead. "Welcome, nephew," he roared, his voice booming across the yard. Before Frank could gather his wits, he found himself engulfed in a bear hug that threatened to crack his ribs. "You must be parched after such a journey. Come, let's get some ale in you." Frank was swept into the hall like a leaf in a storm. The warmth from the roaring hearth hit him like a wall, a stark contrast to the biting chill outside. The interior was a chaotic jumble of medieval tapestries, their once vibrant colors now faded with age, and mounted animal heads that seemed to watch his every move with glassy eyes. Well-worn furniture, bearing the imprints of countless bodies, was scattered haphazardly around the room. The air was thick with the mingled aromas of roasted meat, spilled ale, and the musty scent of old stone. Sir Hildebrand wasted no time in introducing Frank to his cousins, each one a character straight out of a penny, dreadful. Percival, the eldest, stood rigid as a statue, his face set in a permanent scowl that made Frank wonder if he'd ever smiled in his life. Thorncliffe couldn't seem to stop talking, regaling anyone who'd listened with tales of his latest hunt, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement. John nodded along, his fingers twitching as if longing for the feel of a bow or gun. Richard swayed like a sapling in a strong wind, his cheeks flushed and eyes glassy, even at this early hour. Wilfred, dubbed the family fool, hovered at the edges of the group like a nervous sparrow, his eyes darting from face to face as if expecting an attack at any moment. And then there was Rashleigh, the youngest, whose calculating gaze sent a shiver down Frank's spine. There was something in those eyes that spoke of secrets and schemes, a sharp intelligence that seemed at odds with the boisterous atmosphere of the hall. As the day wore on, Frank found himself struggling to adapt to the cacophony of Osbaldistone Hall. The constant clatter of tankards against wooden tables, raucous laughter that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, and heated debates about hunting techniques that bordered on shouting matches assaulted his senses. He longed for the quiet corners of his father's London library, where the only sound was the gentle rustle of turning pages and the scratch of a quill on parchment. Yet as he observed his new family, Frank began to see beyond the surface chaos. He noticed the way Rashleigh's words, though few, seemed to carry more weight than those of his older brothers. He caught glimpses of meaningful glances exchanged between family members when certain topics arose, silent conversations happening beneath the noise. There was more to this household than met the eye, layers of complexity hidden beneath the veneer of country simplicity. As night fell and the drinking intensified, Frank retreated to his assigned quarters. The room was sparse but comfortable, with a small fire crackling in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. As he lay in bed, listening to the muffled sounds of revelry from below, his mind raced with questions. What political allegiances did this family hold? Were the rumors of Jacobite sympathies true? And what of the whispered comments about Catholic leanings that he had overheard? Frank realized that navigating the complex dynamics of Osbaldistone Hall would require all of his wit and observation skills. He felt like a spy in enemy territory, every word and gesture potentially laden with hidden meaning. As he drifted off to sleep, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that his time at Osbaldistone Hall would be far more eventful and potentially dangerous than he had ever imagined. The ancient stones of the hall seemed to whisper secrets, and Frank was determined to uncover them all. Just as sleep was about to claim him, a soft knock at his door jolted Frank awake. His heart raced as he sat up, wondering who could be seeking him out at this late hour. As he approached the door, a note slipped under it, the paper whispering against the floor. With trembling hands, Frank picked it up and unfolded it. The message, written in an elegant hand, read, "Meet me in the library at midnight. There's something you need to know." Suddenly, the prospect of sleep vanished entirely, replaced by a burning curiosity and a hint of fear. Who had sent the note, and what secrets were about to be revealed? Frank's stay at Osbaldistone Hall took an unexpected turn. His world shifted dramatically when he met Diana Vernon, a beautiful and intelligent young woman who resided at the hall under Sir Hildebrand's guardianship. The moment Diana entered the room, the air seemed to crackle with energy. Frank felt his breath catch in his throat, his heart skipping a beat as if struck by lightning. She moved with the grace of a deer, her fiery red hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of autumn leaves. Her eyes, a mesmerizing blend of emerald and amber, sparkled with mischief and intelligence that both intrigued and intimidated him. As days passed, Frank found himself increasingly drawn to Diana's company. In the saddle, she was a force of nature, her horse and she moving as one across the windswept moors. The thundering of hooves matched the pounding of Frank's heart as he watched her, hair streaming behind her like a banner of defiance against the gray Scottish sky. One crisp afternoon, as they walked through the gardens, the sweet scent of late-blooming roses hanging in the air, Diana's laughter suddenly faded. The change was as abrupt as a cloud passing over the sun. Her eyes, usually so bright, clouded over with a mix of sadness and resignation. "Frank," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, carried on the gentle breeze, "there's something you should know." The words that followed fell like heavy stones into the still pond of Frank's consciousness. Diana revealed the burden of a secret engagement, a chain that bound her future to the whims of her uncle. Frank's heart sank, disappointment spreading through his chest like ice water in his veins. As if this revelation wasn't enough to set Frank's world spinning, Diana shared more about her father, Sir Frederick Vernon. A Jacobite in hiding, he was a shadow in their lives, his presence felt but never seen. The weight of secrets hung heavy in the air of Osbaldistone Hall, as tangible as the ancient tapestries adorning its walls, their faded threads telling tales of long-forgotten intrigues. Amidst this web of mystery, Frank's cousin Rashleigh emerged as a figure of fascination and unease. Unlike his boisterous brothers, whose laughter echoed through the halls like thunder, Rashleigh moved with the silent grace of a predator. His intelligence gleamed in his eyes like the edge of a finely honed blade, both impressive and unsettling. When news came that Rashleigh was to work for Frank's father in London, a chill ran down Frank's spine. Something about Rashleigh's too smooth smile and calculating eyes set alarm bells ringing in Frank's mind, like the distant tolling of a warning bell across the misty moors. As Frank delved deeper into the family's affairs, he found himself in a maze of conflicting loyalties. The tension between Catholic and Protestant factions crackled in the air like static electricity before a storm. The Osbaldistones, caught in this religious and political crossfire, seemed to walk a tightrope stretched over a chasm of uncertainty. Whispers of financial troubles reached Frank's ears, carried on the drafts that whistled through the old stone walls. These rumors painted Sir Hildebrand's jovial exterior in a new, more desperate light, like cracks appearing in a once solid foundation. The occasional visits of Father Vaughan, a priest shrouded in mystery, only added to the sense of secrets lurking in every shadowy corner of the hall, his black robes blending with the darkness as if he were part of it. With each passing day, Frank's feelings for Diana grew stronger, like a sapling reaching for the sun through a forest canopy. Yet the thorny reality of her engagement and the complex allegiances surrounding them threatened to choke this budding affection. Frank found himself torn, his heart pulling him towards Diana, while his mind reminded him of his duty to his family and his own beliefs, a battle as fierce as any fought on Scotland's bloody fields. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, Frank stood at a crossroads. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, obscuring the consequences of any choice he might make. His attraction to Diana burned bright, a beacon in the fog of uncertainty. Yet the weight of loyalty to his family and his principles hung heavy on his shoulders, like a cloak of lead. In the gathering dusk of Osbaldistone Hall, Frank Osbaldistone faced a future as unpredictable as the Scottish weather, with storm clouds of passion, duty, and danger looming on the horizon. As he gazed out the window, watching the sun sink below the distant hills, casting long shadows across the land, a commotion in the courtyard below caught his attention. Rashleigh's carriage was being prepared for departure, trunks being loaded with an air of urgency that seemed at odds with the late hour. Frank's brow furrowed as he watched, a sense of foreboding settling over him like the approaching night. What was Rashleigh up to, and how would his journey to London affect the delicate balance of secrets and loyalties at Osbaldistone Hall? Rashleigh Osbaldistone's departure for London was a spectacle of both grandeur and secrecy. As Frank watched his cousin's carriage disappear down the winding road, a peculiar mix of emotions stirred within him. Relief washed over him like a cool breeze, yet an undercurrent of unease tugged at his gut, refusing to be ignored. The crisp morning air nipped at Frank's cheeks as he stood on the worn steps of Osbaldistone Hall. The ancient stones beneath his feet seemed to pulse with centuries of family history, both glorious and dark. The scent of damp earth and autumn leaves filled his nostrils, a stark reminder of how far he was from the familiar streets of London. Rashleigh's parting words echoed in Frank's mind, a sinister whisper that sent a chill down his spine. "Remember, cousin," he had said, his breath hot against Frank's ear in the shadowy corridor, "the world of commerce is a battlefield. One must be prepared for unexpected maneuvers." The words hung in the air like a fog, their meaning as murky as the mist that clung to the distant hills. As days melted into weeks, Frank found himself slowly adapting to life at Osbaldistone Hall. The imposing manor, once as alien as a foreign land, began to reveal its secrets. He explored dusty corridors and hidden nooks, each discovery peeling back another layer of his family's rich tapestry. The creak of old floorboards and the whisper of tapestries in drafty halls became a familiar symphony. The rustic lifestyle seeped into his bones, a stark contrast to the bustling streets of London he once called home. He learned to savor simple pleasures, the warmth of a crackling fire that painted the walls with dancing shadows, the taste of freshly baked bread that filled the kitchen with its homely aroma, the melody of birdsong that greeted each dawn. Yet beneath this pastoral idyll, Frank sensed undercurrents of tension and intrigue, like a hidden stream running beneath seemingly tranquil ground. It was during these quiet moments of exploration that Frank found himself inexorably drawn to Diana. Her presence was like a beacon, guiding him through the unfamiliar terrain of his ancestral home. They would walk together in the gardens, their footsteps crunching on gravel paths, their conversations flowing as freely as the nearby stream. Diana's laughter, bright and clear as a bell, seemed to chase away the shadows that lingered in the corners of the old house. But even as their relationship deepened, Frank was acutely aware of the invisible barriers between them. Family expectations loomed like high walls. Social conventions wrapped around them like thorny vines, and whispered rumors of political allegiances hung in the air like a fog. Still, in stolen moments, a shared glance across the dinner table that set his heart racing, a brush of hands in the library that sent electricity through his veins, Frank felt a connection that defied these obstacles. As weeks wore on, Frank began to notice hushed conversations and furtive glances among the household. Snippets of overheard dialogue hinted at Jacobite sympathies, whispers of rebellion and loyalty to a deposed king. The political landscape, he realized, was as treacherous as the moors that surrounded Osbaldistone Hall, where one misstep could lead to disaster. One evening, as Frank sat by the fire, lost in thought, the flames casting flickering shadows across his face. A servant appeared with a letter bearing his father's seal. The moment he broke the wax, the scent of his father's study wafting up from the paper, he knew something was terribly wrong. The usually steady hand of William Osbaldistone was shaky, the ink blotched in places as if the pen had been gripped too tightly. Frank's eyes raced across the page, his heart pounding with each revelation. Rashleigh, the cousin he had never fully trusted, had betrayed them all. He had embezzled a vast sum from the company, leaving it teetering on the brink of ruin. The words on the page seemed to dance and blur as Frank read of forged documents, manipulated accounts, and a web of deceit so intricate it made his head spin. His father's distress was palpable in every line. "My son," the letter implored, "you are our last hope. The future of our family, the livelihoods of all who depend on us, rest in your hands." The weight of responsibility settled on Frank's shoulders like a physical burden, threatening to crush him. He paced the room, the letter clutched in his trembling hands, as the full implications of Rashleigh's treachery sank in. The flickering firelight cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the dark thoughts that raced through his mind. The tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to mock him, each second bringing the family closer to ruin. Sleep eluded him that night. He tossed and turned, his mind a whirlwind of plans and fears. The sheets tangled around him like the web of deceit he was caught in. By dawn, as the first pale light crept through the leaded windows, painting the room in a ghostly glow, Frank had made his decision. He would go after Rashleigh, track him to the ends of the earth if necessary, to recover the stolen funds and salvage his father's reputation. With a heavy heart but steely resolve, Frank began to pack. He moved quietly through the still sleeping house, gathering what he would need for the journey ahead. Each item he placed in his bag felt like another step away from the life he had begun to build here. As he prepared to leave, he penned a brief note to Diana and Sir Hildebrand, explaining that urgent business called him away. The words felt inadequate, unable to convey the turmoil in his heart or the danger he was about to face. As the sun rose over Osbaldistone Hall, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Frank took one last look at the place that had become, against all odds, a home. The morning mist clung to the grounds, giving the scene an ethereal quality. Then, with a deep breath that filled his lungs with the crisp morning air, he turned his face northward. Scotland lay ahead, and with it, the treacherous Rashleigh and the fate of the Osbaldistone name. Frank's hand rested on the door handle, his bag slung over his shoulder. He was poised on the threshold, caught between the safety of Osbaldistone Hall and the uncertain future that awaited him. As he stepped out into the misty morning, a voice called out behind him, "Frank, wait!" It was Diana, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide with concern. Frank's heart leapt into his throat. Would he have the strength to leave her behind? Frank Osbaldistone's heart was heavy with determination as he set out on his journey to Scotland. He was resolved to find his cousin Rashleigh and recover the funds stolen from his father's business. The road north stretched before him like a serpent, winding through unfamiliar landscapes. With each passing mile, the scenery grew wilder, mirroring the tumultuous emotions churning within Frank's chest. The gentle rolling hills of England gave way to rugged terrain, the air growing crisp and sharp in his lungs. The scent of heather tickled his nostrils, a constant reminder of how far he'd come from home. Frank's sturdy bay horse plodded tirelessly onward, its hooves beating a steady rhythm against the earth. The sound became a metronome to Frank's racing thoughts, each step bringing him closer to his elusive quarry. The weight of his mission pressed down on him, as tangible as the saddle beneath him. As he crossed into Scotland, the world around him shifted. The change was subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Accents grew thicker, rolling off tongues in a melody Frank struggled to decipher. Looks from passers-by turned wary, eyes narrowing at the sight of his English attire. Frank felt the weight of being an outsider settle on his shoulders, a cloak of isolation in a land where such distinctions could mean the difference between a warm hearth and a cold night on the moor. Glasgow rose before him like a smoky giant, its tenements and spires reaching skyward through a haze of coal smoke. The city's heartbeat pulsed in Frank's ears. The clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the shouts of street vendors, the hum of 1,000 lives intertwining. It was a stark contrast to the quiet countryside he'd left behind. And for a moment, Frank felt overwhelmed by the sensory assault. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of Rashleigh among the sea of strangers. Each unfamiliar visage sent a jolt of anticipation through him, followed swiftly by disappointment. The city seemed to swallow his cousin's trail, leaving Frank grasping at shadows. He began his search in earnest, his boots echoing on cobblestone streets as he made his way from tavern to shop. Each inquiry was met with suspicion, shopkeepers' eyes narrowing, voices dropping to whispers. Some spoke of Rashleigh in hushed tones, hinting at connections with Jacobite sympathizers that made Frank's blood run cold. The web of intrigue surrounding his cousin seemed to grow more tangled with each passing hour. As night fell, the city transformed. Shadows lengthened and the air grew thick with an undercurrent of danger. Frank found himself in a dimly lit tavern, the air heavy with pipe smoke and the murmur of conspiratorial voices. He leaned in close to a grizzled old man who claimed to have seen Rashleigh just days before. The man's breath reeked of cheap whiskey, his rheumy eyes glinting with a mixture of greed and fear. Suddenly, a shout rang out, followed by the crash of breaking glass. In an instant, the tavern erupted into chaos. The world became a blur of motion and sound. Fists flew and bodies tumbled. Frank, caught in the middle, struggled to make sense of the madness. A hand grabbed his coat, fingers digging into the fabric. Another struck his jaw, pain exploding across his face. He stumbled, disoriented, the taste of copper flooding his mouth. In the fray, Frank felt something slip from his pocket. His heart lurched as he realized it was the letter of introduction his father had given him, his only proof of identity in this foreign land. He lunged for it, but a sea of bodies separated him from the precious document. As quickly as it had begun, the fight was over. The tavern door burst open, and city guards poured in, their uniforms a splash of red in the smoky gloom. A portly merchant, his face red with indignation, pointed an accusing finger at Frank. "That's him!" the man bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. "The English thief who robbed me!" Frank's protests fell on deaf ears, his words drowned out by the cacophony of angry voices. Strong hands gripped his arms, rough and unyielding. He found himself being marched through the streets, the jeers of onlookers ringing in his ears. Faces loomed out of the darkness, twisted with scorn and suspicion. The iron-barred door of the Glasgow jail clanged shut behind him with a finality that sent a chill down Frank's spine. The sound echoed in the narrow stone corridor, a death knell to his hopes and plans. As he was shoved into a dank cell, the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. Frank sank to the cold stone floor, his mind reeling. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? The darkness of the cell seemed to close in around him, a stark reminder of how far he was from home and how precarious his position had become. He was alone in a foreign land, falsely accused, with no one to vouch for his character or support his cause. As he listened to the distant sounds of the city beyond the prison walls, Frank realized that his quest to save his father's business and clear his own name had only just begun. The challenges ahead loomed larger than the stone walls that confined him, a mountain he wasn't sure he had the strength to climb. In the depths of his despair, a new sound caught Frank's attention. Footsteps approached his cell, slow and deliberate. The jangle of keys echoed in the corridor. Frank's heart raced as he scrambled to his feet, unsure whether to hope for salvation or brace for further calamity. The cell door creaked open, revealing a figure shrouded in shadow. As the stranger stepped into the dim light, Frank's breath caught in his throat. He found himself face to face with Frank Osbaldistone found himself imprisoned in Glasgow, his fate hanging by a thread. The young Englishman's predicament had taken a dire turn, landing him in the dank confines of a Scottish jail cell. The air hung heavy with the stench of mold and despair, pressing down on Frank like a physical weight. He huddled in the corner of his cell, the rough stone walls scraping against his back, a constant reminder of his confinement. His mind raced, thoughts tumbling over one another like leaves in a storm, searching desperately for a way out of this mess. The sudden echo of heavy footsteps jolted Frank from his reverie. The sound grew louder, each step sending a tremor of anticipation through his body. The footsteps stopped abruptly outside his cell, followed by the ominous creak of rusty hinges. Frank's heart pounded in his chest as the door swung open, revealing a figure that seemed to fill the entire doorway. There, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor, stood the legendary Rob Roy McGregor. The Highland outlaw's piercing gaze swept over Frank, assessing him with the intensity of a predator. But beneath the fierce exterior, Frank caught a glimmer of something else. A spark of curiosity, perhaps even sympathy. "So, you're the Englishman who stirred up such a fuss," Rob Roy's deep voice rumbled, a hint of amusement coloring his words. The outlaw's presence seemed to push back the oppressive darkness of the cell, bringing with it a whisper of hope. As Frank recounted his tale, he watched Rob Roy's weathered face, noting every twitch and furrow of his brow. The outlaw listened intently, his eyes never leaving Frank's face. With each word, Frank felt a small flame of hope ignite within him, fighting against the darkness of his situation. "I believe you, lad," Rob Roy declared, his voice carrying the weight of a man accustomed to making life-altering decisions. "And I'll help you escape this hellhole." Frank's heart leaped at the words, but caution held him back. Could he trust this notorious outlaw? As if reading his thoughts, Rob Roy's lips curled into a knowing smile. "I may be an outlaw, but I have my own code of honor. You'll soon learn that in the Highlands, a man's word is his bond." Over the next hours, Rob Roy unveiled his plan, his words painting a vivid picture of their escape. He spoke of secret passages beneath the city, known only to a select few, and of loyal clansmen ready to create a diversion. Frank listened, his mind a whirlwind of excitement and trepidation, the taste of freedom tantalizingly close. As night fell, the prison erupted into chaos. Shouts and the clash of metal rang out from the courtyard, a cacophony orchestrated by Rob Roy's men. Frank's cell door swung open, revealing Rob Roy and two of his clansmen, their faces half hidden by the shadows. "Now, lad," Rob Roy whispered urgently, "it's time to fly." They plunged into the labyrinth beneath the city, the damp walls closing in around them like the jaws of some great beast. The air grew thick and musty, each breath a struggle. Frank's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the freedom that lay tantalizingly close. The tunnels twisted and turned, a maze that would have left Frank hopelessly lost without Rob Roy's sure guidance. Several times they froze in place, holding their breath as the sound of pursuit echoed through the passages. In those moments, Frank felt as if the very stones of the city were conspiring to keep him trapped. The darkness pressed in, threatening to suffocate him, but Rob Roy's steady presence kept him grounded. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they emerged into the cool night air. The Scottish countryside stretched out before them, a sea of darkness dotted with the faint lights of distant farms. Frank took a deep breath, savoring the taste of freedom like a man who had been drowning. As they made their way into the hills, Rob Roy turned to Frank, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight. "I can guide you through the Highlands, help you find Rashleigh and those documents," he offered. "I've got my own scores to settle with some of the folk mixed up in your troubles." Frank hesitated, weighing his options. He was an outsider in this rugged land, and the task before him seemed insurmountable. Yet there was something about Rob Roy, a strength, a sense of unwavering purpose, that called to him. "I accept your offer," Frank said finally, his voice firm with newfound resolve. As they set out into the heart of the Highlands, Rob Roy began to share his knowledge. He spoke of the clan system, of ancient feuds and alliances, of a way of life as old as the mountains themselves. Frank listened, absorbing every word, knowing that this unlikely alliance marked the beginning of a new chapter in his adventure, one that would test him in ways he had never imagined. The rugged landscape stretched out before them, a daunting expanse of rocky hills and misty valleys. Frank felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as he gazed at the unfamiliar terrain. He glanced at Rob Roy, noting the outlaw's confident stride and keen eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. As they crested a hill, the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky. Frank marveled at the breathtaking view, but a sudden realization sent a chill down his spine. He was about to embark on a perilous journey through unknown territory, guided by a man he barely knew. What dangers lay ahead in the wild Scottish Highlands? And could he truly trust Rob Roy MacGregor, the notorious outlaw who now held Frank's fate in his hands? Frank and Rob Roy embarked on a perilous expedition through the Scottish Highlands. The city-bred Frank, unaccustomed to the rugged terrain, found himself relying heavily on his newfound allies' expertise and connections to navigate the treacherous landscape. The journey was a crucible, forging Frank's resolve in the fires of adversity. Each step was a battle against nature itself. Craggy mountains loomed before them, their jagged peaks piercing the sky like ancient sentinels. Frank's boots scrabbled for purchase on loose shale, his lungs burning with each ragged breath of thin, crisp air. The very land seemed to resist their passage, as if testing their determination. Rob Roy moved with the fluid grace of one born to these wild places. His feet found hidden paths, his eyes reading the lay of the land like a well-worn map. Frank, in stark contrast, stumbled and gasped, his city-softened muscles screaming in protest. Yet with each passing day, he felt a change stirring within him. His body was adapting, growing stronger, more resilient. The Highlands were remaking him, one grueling step at a time. As they huddled around crackling campfires, Rob Roy became more than just a guide. He was a living bridge to a world Frank had never truly understood. The grizzled Highlander's voice, low and gravelly, painted vivid pictures of clan customs, ancient feuds, and unbreakable loyalties. Frank listened, wide-eyed, as the tapestry of Highland culture unfolded before him. "You see, lad," Rob Roy said one evening, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames, "these hills have seen more blood spilled than you can imagine. Every stone, every stream has a story to tell." Frank nodded, his gaze drawn to the looming shadows of the mountains. The wind whispered through the heather, carrying with it the echoes of countless generations. He could almost hear the clash of steel, the battle cries of long-dead warriors. Their journey was far from peaceful. In a village nestled deep in a narrow glen, disaster nearly struck. Rob Roy's keen instincts sensed the trap set by government forces before it could fully close around them. As they fled, arrows whistled past their ears, the deadly song of near misses. Frank's heart thundered in his chest, blood roaring in his ears as he ducked and weaved, following Rob Roy's lead in a desperate dance of survival. The Highland clans they encountered were as varied and unpredictable as the landscape itself. Some welcomed them with open arms, laying out feasts that made Frank's mouth water after days of hard travel. The warmth of their hospitality was a balm to his weary soul. Others eyed them with naked suspicion, hands never straying far from their weapons. Rob Roy's name often preceded them, a double-edged sword that could mean the difference between a warm bed and a cold night exposed to the elements. As they followed Rashleigh's elusive trail, the political undercurrents of their quest became increasingly apparent. Whispers of Jacobite sympathizers reached their ears, carried on the wind like seeds of rebellion. Frank began to realize the far-reaching implications of his cousin's betrayal. It wasn't just about stolen money anymore. The very fate of Scotland seemed to hang in the balance. Their journey was punctuated by brutal skirmishes with rival clans. Each encounter was a harsh lesson for Frank, teaching him the unforgiving realities of Highland combat. He learned to wield a sword with growing confidence, its weight becoming an extension of his arm. The art of moving silently through the underbrush became second nature, as did reading the land and using it to his advantage. Nature itself seemed determined to test their mettle. One day, as they attempted to cross a swollen river, its waters brown and angry with recent rains, Frank lost his footing on the slippery rocks. The current swept him away, tumbling him like a rag doll in its icy grip. Just as his lungs began to burn for air, panic clawing at his chest, he felt a strong hand grasp his collar. Rob Roy, with Herculean strength, hauled him to safety. Gasping and shivering on the riverbank, Frank looked at his companion with newfound respect. "Thank you," he managed between chattering teeth, water streaming from his sodden clothes. Rob Roy simply nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We're in this together now, lad. Best not forget it." As they drew closer to Rashleigh's suspected location, the air grew thick with tension. Frank could feel the weight of impending confrontation settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He realized with a mix of excitement and trepidation that he was no longer the same man who had set out on this journey. The Highlands had changed him, molded him into something new and unfamiliar. The dangers increased with each passing day, shadows seeming to lurk behind every rock and tree. Frank's hand now rested easily on the hilt of his sword, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He understood now that his cousin's betrayal was merely the tip of a much larger, more treacherous iceberg. As they pressed on, the true scope of Rashleigh's actions began to unfold before them, revealing a web of deceit that stretched far beyond anything Frank could have imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire, Frank and Rob Roy crested a final ridge. Below them, nestled in a remote glen, lay a small cluster of buildings. Smoke rose from a chimney, a telltale sign of habitation. Frank's heart leapt into his throat as he spotted a familiar figure moving between the structures. "There," he whispered, his voice hoarse with anticipation. "It's him! It's Rashleigh!" Rob Roy's hand fell heavily on Frank's shoulder, restraining him from rushing headlong into confrontation. "Steady, lad," he cautioned. "The fox is cunning, and we're on his territory now." As darkness fell, they began their stealthy approach. Frank's every nerve was alight with tension, his body coiled like a spring. After all they had endured, after all the miles traveled and hardships faced, his moment of reckoning was finally at hand. Frank's relentless pursuit had finally led him to his quarry. In a remote Highland glen, he at last confronted Rashleigh, his treacherous cousin. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and heather, a fitting backdrop to the storm of emotions raging within Frank. Before him stretched a tapestry of muted greens and grays, the rugged landscape mirroring the turmoil in his heart. Overhead, dark clouds roiled, their ominous presence a portent of the confrontation to come. Rashleigh stood mere paces away, his face a mask of surprise quickly giving way to disdain. The wind whipped at his cloak, lending him an air of dark majesty that only served to fuel Frank's anger. "Well, well," Rashleigh drawled, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "If it isn't my dear cousin Frank, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Frank's jaw clenched, his fingers instinctively tightening around the hilt of his sword. The cool metal against his palm grounded him, a reminder of the gravity of this moment. "You know why I'm here, Rashleigh. Return the documents you stole and explain your betrayal. Now." A cold smile played across Rashleigh's lips, sending a chill down Frank's spine. "Oh, come now. Surely you don't expect me to simply hand over my insurance policy. You're out of your depth, Frank. There are greater forces at play than you could possibly understand." The tension between them crackled like lightning, thick as the mist clinging to the surrounding hills. Frank's heart pounded in his ears as he took a step forward, his patience wearing as thin as a frayed rope. "I'm not here for your games or your political machinations. This is about family, about honor. Something you clearly know nothing about." Rashleigh's eyes flashed dangerously, a storm brewing behind them. "Family? Honor? Such quaint notions. While you've been chasing your tail across the Highlands, I've been shaping the future of this nation. You're nothing but a pawn, Frank, and a rather dim one at that." The insult struck home like a physical blow. Frank felt his blood begin to boil, a red haze descending over his vision. With a swift motion that surprised even himself, he drew his sword. The ring of steel echoed through the quiet glen, a clarion call to battle. "Enough talk," Frank growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If you won't see reason, perhaps you'll understand the language of steel." Rashleigh's own blade cleared its scabbard with a hiss, the sound sending a shiver of anticipation down Frank's spine. "As you wish, cousin. Let's see if your swordsmanship has improved since our last encounter." The two men circled each other like wolves, their blades glinting in the weak sunlight that managed to pierce the brooding clouds. Frank's heart raced, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through his veins. He lunged forward, his sword a silver blur cutting through the air. Rashleigh parried the blow with a resounding clash, the impact sending shockwaves up both their arms. Back and forth they went, their duel a deadly dance echoing through the glen. The scrape of boots on rocky ground and the rasp of labored breathing punctuated the metallic symphony of their combat. Frank pressed his advantage, righteous anger fueling each strike. But Rashleigh was no novice, matching him blow for blow with a skill that spoke of frequent practice. Sweat beaded on their brows, muscles burning with the effort of sustained combat. As their fight intensified, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was only the next thrust, the next parry, each man seeking an opening to end the conflict once and for all. Frank's vision narrowed, focused solely on his opponent and the deadly dance of their blades. Just as it seemed one of them must surely fall, a booming voice cut through the din of battle like a thunderclap. Enough! Like a force of nature, Rob Roy McGregor burst onto the scene. The legendary Highland outlaw moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, physically inserting himself between the combatants. With one powerful hand on each man's chest, he forced them apart. "Have ye both lost your minds?" Rob Roy growled, his eyes flashing with anger and concern. "Do you not realize the consequences of what you're about to do?" Frank, chest heaving, struggled to catch his breath. The sudden interruption had broken the spell of combat, and he found himself grateful for Rob Roy's intervention, even as frustration coursed through him like a raging river. Rashleigh, ever the opportunist, seized the moment of confusion. With a snarl of defiance that sent birds scattering from nearby trees, he broke free from Rob Roy's grasp and darted away. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the misty landscape, the stolen documents still in his possession. "No!" Frank cried out, his voice raw with desperation. He moved to give chase, but Rob Roy's firm hand on his shoulder held him back like an anchor. "Let him go, lad," the outlaw said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Killing him would have brought you more trouble than you can imagine. This fight's grown beyond just you and him now." As the adrenaline of battle faded, Frank felt the weight of Rob Roy's words settle upon him like a heavy cloak. He realized with a sinking feeling that his quest had indeed grown far more complex than he had ever anticipated. The stolen documents, his father's reputation, and now the looming specter of rebellion, all were tangled in a web of Highland politics that he was only beginning to understand. With Rashleigh's escape, the stakes had been raised even higher. Frank knew that his next move would be crucial, not just for himself and his family, but potentially for the fate of Scotland itself. As he stood there in the misty glen, the echo of clashing swords still ringing in his ears, Frank Osbaldistone steeled himself for the challenges that lay ahead. Little did Frank know that as he contemplated his next move, forces beyond his control were already in motion. The air seemed to thicken with an electric anticipation, as if the very land itself was holding its breath. In the distance, a lone bird called out a warning, its cry carried away by the wind. Something was coming, something that would shake the very foundations of the nation and test Frank's resolve like never before. The 1715 Jacobite rising erupted, sending shockwaves through the nation. It ignited a powder keg of long-held grievances and divided loyalties, forever changing the landscape of Scotland. News of the uprising spread like wildfire through the misty glens and craggy peaks of the Highlands. The air was thick with whispers, carried on the wind, and shared in hushed tones around peat fires. At Braemar, the Earl of Mar had raised the Stuart standard, its crimson fabric snapping defiantly against the steel-gray sky. The call to arms echoed across the land, a siren song to those who yearned for the return of the old dynasty. Frank stood at the crossroads of history, his heart torn between duty and newfound understanding. The Highlands, once a patchwork of clan territories bound by ancient traditions, now churned with chaos. Some clans rallied to the Jacobite banner without hesitation, their blood singing with memories of past glory. Others clung tightly to their loyalty to the Hanoverian government, fear of reprisal etched on their faces. The very air crackled with tension, thick as the morning mist that clung to the purple heather. Frank breathed it in, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. His time in the Highlands had opened his eyes to a world of fierce pride and deep-rooted traditions. Now the faces of the people he had met, their stories and struggles, haunted his thoughts. This was no longer a distant political squabble, but a conflict that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the land he had come to love. Rob Roy's farewell rang in Frank's ears, a mixture of gruff affection and solemn warning. "Remember, lad," the outlaw had growled, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, "in times like these, trust is as rare and precious as gold. Keep your wits about you, and may fortune favor the bold." With those words, Rob had melted into the shadows of the forest, off to join the gathering Jacobite forces. Left alone to navigate the treacherous waters of this conflict, Frank found himself witness to a land transforming before his eyes. Villages that had once buzzed with the mundane rhythms of daily life now pulsed with a feverish energy. In hidden glens and torchlit caves, men gathered to clean old muskets and sharpen rusted swords. Their faces were a mix of determination and fear, the firelight casting deep shadows that seemed to age them beyond their years. The air hummed with snatches of Gaelic song, ancient battle cries given new life by the prospect of imminent conflict. Frank's skin prickled at the sound, feeling the weight of centuries of history in every note. His journey took him through a landscape alive with the preparations for war. Fields that should have been filled with the gentle lowing of cattle now echoed with the nervous stamping of horses requisitioned for the cause. In forest clearings, young men drilled with makeshift weapons, their movements clumsy but filled with a burning passion that made Frank's breath catch in his throat. The very rocks and trees seemed to whisper of coming battle, the land itself awakening to the prospect of change. Frank ran his hand along the rough bark of an ancient oak, wondering how many conflicts this silent sentinel had witnessed. Yet even as the Jacobite cause gained momentum, Frank encountered the inexorable march of government forces moving north. The clash of these two worlds brought moments of heart-stopping tension. He found himself ducking into shadowy doorways or melting into crowds at the sight of red-coated soldiers, his recent Highland associations weighing on him like a physical burden. Each encounter was a dance on the knife's edge. Frank's heart pounded in his chest, every muscle tense as he struggled to maintain a facade of calm. A wrong word or a misplaced glance could spell disaster, and the consequences of discovery loomed large in his mind. As he continued his desperate quest to recover the stolen documents and save his father's business, Frank met a kaleidoscope of characters caught up in the swirling tides of history. A grizzled veteran of past conflicts spoke of glory and honor with misty eyes, his gnarled hands tracing battle plans and spilled ale on a tavern table. A young mother clutched her babe to her breast, whispering fears of what the future might hold, her eyes wide with a terror that made Frank's throat tighten with empathy. The once familiar roads became alien and fraught with danger. Villages that had welcomed him with open arms now eyed strangers with suspicion, their doors barred and windows shuttered against the encroaching chaos. The countryside, once a place of rugged beauty, transformed into a labyrinth of potential threats. Every rustling bush could hide a government patrol or a band of desperate men driven to banditry by the upheaval. Frank drew upon every ounce of wit in every hard-earned lesson from his time in the Highlands. He adopted local accents, his tongue stumbling over unfamiliar syllables as he traded in rumors and half-truths. He navigated the shifting landscape of loyalties with the delicacy of a tightrope walker, always aware of the yawning chasm of danger below. All the while, the twin specters of Rashleigh and the missing papers drove him forward. It was a personal quest that seemed both trivial and monumental against the backdrop of impending war. Frank clung to this mission like a lifeline, using it to anchor himself in the storm of conflicting loyalties and shifting alliances. As he pressed on, the rising tide of rebellion forced Frank to confront the very foundations of his beliefs. The neat categories of loyalty and treason, of right and wrong, blurred and shifted like mirages on the horizon. The complex history between England and Scotland, once relegated to dusty textbooks, now played out in vivid, often brutal reality before his eyes. Frank found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about governance, about justice, about the very nature of belonging to a nation. Each new encounter, Each whispered conversation added another layer to his understanding of the complex tapestry of motivations and fears that drove this uprising. The chaos of war added a new level of urgency to Frank's mission. Travel became more perilous with each passing day. Allegiances shifted like quicksand beneath his feet. Roads were blocked by hastily constructed barricades, villages stood abandoned, their emptiness a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. As night fell, Frank found himself huddled in the ruins of an old crofter's cottage, the wind whistling through gaps in the stone walls. The chill seeped into his bones, but it was nothing compared to the cold fear that gripped his heart. He was an Englishman in a land tearing itself apart, caught between duty and the unexpected bonds he had formed. In the flickering light of a small fire, Frank unfolded a crumpled map, tracing possible routes with a trembling finger. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but sleep was a luxury he could ill afford. Every moment counted in his race against time and the rising tide of war. Suddenly, a sound outside made Frank freeze. Footsteps crunched on gravel, drawing nearer to his hiding place. His hand instinctively went to the pistol at his side, even as his mind raced through possible escape routes. The footsteps stopped just outside the ruined doorway. Frank held his breath, every muscle tense, ready to fight or flee. Then a familiar voice cut through the darkness, sending a jolt of shock through his system. "Frank? Frank, my boy, are you there?" It was impossible. It couldn't be. Yet there was no mistaking that voice. With a mixture of relief and dread, Frank realized his father, William Osbaldistone, had somehow found his way to Scotland. The very man he had been trying to protect by recovering the stolen documents was now here, in the heart of a brewing rebellion. As Frank struggled to find his voice, to call out to his father, a new fear gripped him. How would he explain his actions, his alliances, and more pressingly, how could he keep his father safe in a land on the brink of war? The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Frank's response. The fate of his mission, his father's safety, and perhaps the course of the rebellion itself hung in the balance of his next move. The Jacobite rising was gaining momentum across Scotland, its flames of rebellion spreading like wildfire. It was during this tumultuous time that Frank's father, William Osbaldistone, arrived in the northern country, desperate to resolve the looming business crisis personally. The air hung heavy with the scent of peat smoke and whiskey as Frank waited anxiously in a dimly lit inn on the outskirts of Edinburgh. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the rough-hewn walls, mirroring the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. Every creak of the floorboards sent his heart racing, wondering if it heralded his father's arrival. Suddenly the door burst open, letting in a gust of cold air that made the candles sputter. There stood William Osbaldistone, his face a map of worry lines and exhaustion. Their eyes met across the room, and for a heartbeat time stood still. "Father!" Frank cried, his voice cracking with emotion. William rushed forward, enveloping his son in a fierce embrace. The warmth of their reunion was short-lived, however, as the weight of their predicament quickly reasserted itself. "Frank, my boy," William said, his voice hoarse. "What news of the documents? And Rashleigh? Where is that scoundrel?" Frank felt the pressure of his father's expectations like a physical weight on his shoulders. Taking a deep breath, he began to recount his adventures. He spoke of his encounters with the enigmatic Rob Roy, the outbreak of the rebellion, and the complex web of alliances and enmities that defined life in the Highlands. As he talked, Frank could see a mixture of concern and growing respect dawning on his father's weathered face. Together, they pieced together the extent of Rashleigh's deception. Their voices hushed as they discussed the potentially ruinous consequences for the Osbaldistone firm. "We're walking a tightrope, son," William muttered, his fingers drumming nervously on the rough-hewn table. "One false step and we could lose everything. Our fortune, our reputation, perhaps even our lives." The gravity of their situation settled over them like a heavy cloak. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying with it the distant sounds of conflict. The rebellion was drawing closer, and with it, the danger that surrounded them grew more palpable by the hour. As they set out to recover the documents and confront Rashleigh, Frank found himself increasingly torn. On one side stood his family obligations and the urgent need to salvage the business. On the other, the friendships he had forged in Scotland tugged at his heart, particularly his bond with the fiery Rob Roy and the enigmatic Diana Vernon, whose Jacobite sympathies became increasingly apparent. Their journey through Scotland was fraught with peril. Military checkpoints dotted the landscape like a deadly game of chess, and the distant boom of cannon fire served as a constant reminder of the war raging around them. Frank watched with a mixture of pride and amusement as his father, the consummate London businessman, learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of clan politics. One evening, as they huddled around a campfire, the wind keening through the glens like a banshee's wail, William turned to Frank with a look of newfound respect. "I never thought I'd say this," he admitted, "but your time here hasn't been wasted, Frank. You've grown in ways I couldn't have imagined." Frank felt a warmth spread through his chest at his father's words, a balm against the chill of the Highland night. For years he had sought William's approval, and now, in the midst of this crisis, he had finally earned it. As they raced against time to salvage the business, a new understanding blossomed between them. Frank came to appreciate the immense pressures his father had shouldered all these years, while William recognized the strength and adaptability his son had developed. Their shared ordeal acted as a crucible, melting away old resentments and forging a stronger bond. Yet, even as they grew closer, the specter of financial ruin and potential political fallout loomed large. Every passing day without the documents felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. The urgency of their mission drove them forward, a beacon of hope in the storm-tossed sea of rebellion that surrounded them. As night fell on their latest day of searching, Frank and William exchanged a look of grim determination. They had picked up Rashleigh's trail, and tomorrow promised to bring them face to face with the man who had betrayed them. The air crackled with tension, and Frank's hand instinctively tightened on the hilt of his sword. "Tomorrow we end this," William said, his voice low and dangerous. Frank nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Little did they know that the pursuit of Rashleigh was about to reach its boiling point, and that the coming day would bring them to a dramatic and potentially deadly confrontation amidst the chaos of the Jacobite rising. The pursuit of Rashleigh had reached its boiling point. It was during a skirmish related to the Jacobite rising that the chase would finally come to its dramatic conclusion. Frank's heart thundered in his chest, each beat a war drum urging him forward. The Scottish landscape, once a tapestry of emerald hills and misty glens, now lay scarred and smoking. Acrid gunpowder stung his nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Distant cries of men locked in battle pierced the air, a haunting chorus of pain and desperation. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the chaos. Every shadow, every flicker of movement could be Rashleigh. The weight of betrayal hung heavy on Frank's shoulders, driving him forward with grim determination. Fate, that fickle mistress, led Frank to a ruined abbey. Ancient stones loomed above him, their weathered faces etched with centuries of secrets. Flickering firelight danced across the crumbling walls, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him with ghostly fingers. The sounds of battle echoed off the stone, creating an eerie cacophony that set Frank's nerves on edge. There, amidst the rubble and ruin, stood Rashleigh. His cousin's face was a mask of desperation, eyes wild and darting like a cornered animal. The weight of his treachery seemed to bow his shoulders, aging him beyond his years. "It's over, Rashleigh," Frank called out, his voice barely carrying over the din of battle. Rashleigh's lips curled into a sneer, a flash of white teeth in the gloom. "You have no idea, dear cousin, of the depths of my actions," he spat, each word dripping with venom. What followed chilled Frank to his very core. Rashleigh, his voice a mixture of defiance and resignation, confessed to crimes that went far beyond mere embezzlement. He had played both sides of the conflict, selling information to Jacobites and government troops alike, a double agent, dancing on the edge of a knife, with no loyalty save to his own ambition. The revelation hung in the air, heavy as a storm cloud. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then, with nothing left to lose, Rashleigh lunged at Frank. Their struggle was fierce and desperate, a dance of life and death amidst the ruins. Grunts of exertion and the scrabble of feet on loose stones filled the air. Each man fought not just for victory, but for their very future. Suddenly, a crack split the air. A stray bullet, blind and uncaring, found its mark in Rashleigh's chest. Time slowed to a crawl as Frank watched his cousin crumple, falling like a marionette with cut strings. Breathing heavily, sweat stinging his eyes, Frank approached the fallen man. Rashleigh's life was ebbing away, but his eyes burned with a final, feverish intensity. With trembling hands, Frank recovered the stolen documents from Rashleigh's coat, the key to saving his father's business. As death's shadow fell over him, Rashleigh's tongue loosened. He spoke of family secrets long buried. Sir Hildebrand's clandestine support for the Stuarts, the true nature of Diana Vernon's secret engagement. Each revelation was a hammer blow, shattering Frank's understanding of his family's history. The recovery of the documents came at a great personal cost. As Frank clutched the papers, he felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The line between justice and vengeance, once so clear, now blurred like watercolors in the rain. With Rashleigh's final, rattling breath, an eerie quiet descended upon the ruins. But the respite was short-lived. The battle still raged beyond the abbey walls, a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. Securing the precious documents against his chest, Frank began his perilous journey back through the conflict-ridden landscape. The world around him was a canvas of chaos. Smoke-filled skies obscured the sun. The clash of steel rang out like discordant bells, and the cries of the wounded painted a grim picture of war's true face. It was in this maelstrom that Frank encountered Rob Roy one last time. Despite being on opposing sides of the rising, the Highland warrior's friendship remained steadfast. With Rob's help, Frank navigated the treacherous battlefield, the documents tucked safely against his heart like a talisman. As Frank prepared for the journey back to his father, he felt the weight of change upon him. The documents in his possession would save the family business. But at what cost? The experiences in Scotland, the tragic fate of his cousin, and the revelations about his family had transformed him. The boy who had arrived in these lands was gone, replaced by a man shaped by conflict, betrayal, and hard-won wisdom. Standing on the edge of the battlefield, Frank looked back at the smoke-shrouded landscape. He knew that while one chapter of his life was ending, another was just beginning. With a deep breath, he turned and set off, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Frank made his way through the war-torn countryside, a distant roar caught his attention. The sound grew louder, a crescendo of clashing steel and battle cries. He crested a hill and froze at the sight before him. In the valley below, two massive armies converged, the Jacobite forces and the government troops, their standards snapping in the wind. The Battle of Sheriffmuir was about to begin, and Frank found himself caught between two colliding tides of history. The Jacobite rising met its end at the Battle of Sheriffmuir, its defeat echoing through the misty glens. As the clash of swords faded, an uneasy peace slowly crept back into the Highlands. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and gunpowder, a stark reminder of the bloodshed that had torn through the land. Frank stood atop a windswept hill, his eyes scanning the vast expanse before him. The rolling hills, once vibrant with the colors of clan tartans, now seemed muted and somber. His heart ached with a bittersweet mixture of relief and sorrow. The stolen documents, once a crushing weight around his neck, now rested safely in his worn leather satchel. His family's name was cleared, but at what cost? The victory felt hollow as Frank's mind wandered to the faces of those he'd met on his journey. Proud clan chiefs, now in chains or vanishing into the mists of exile. The very fabric of Highland life seemed to be unraveling before his eyes, like a tapestry pulled apart thread by thread. With a deep breath that tasted of heather and smoke, Frank turned his face towards England. The responsibility he had once fled now called to him with renewed urgency. His father's business awaited, no longer a dreaded burden, but a challenge to be embraced. The lessons learned in these wild lands had changed him, forging him anew in the fires of adversity. As Frank implemented changes in his father's business, he found himself weaving Highland traditions into English practices. The honor of a Highland oath and the strength found in unwavering loyalty became the cornerstones of his new approach. Each decision he made carried the weight of the experiences that had shaped him. In this time of transition, Frank found an unexpected ally in Diana Vernon. Her Catholic faith and Jacobite sympathies, once seemingly insurmountable barriers, now formed a bridge of understanding between them. Their wedding was a joyous affair, a beacon of hope amidst the lingering shadows of conflict. The sound of bagpipes mingled with English hymns, a harmony of two worlds coming together. Together, Frank and Diana worked tirelessly to aid those affected by the failed rising. Frank's business connections became lifelines for displaced Highlanders, offering work and new beginnings in a world that had shifted beneath their feet. Diana's compassion and Frank's determination formed a formidable team, their love strengthened by shared purpose and the trials they had overcome. In quiet moments, when the bustle of London faded to a distant hum, Frank's thoughts would drift to Rob Roy. The enigmatic Highlander had left an indelible mark on his character, shaping his worldview in ways he was still discovering. News would trickle in of Rob Roy's continued evasion of the authorities, a ghost in the glens, adapting to the changing tides like a salmon in a swift stream. Occasionally a letter would arrive, its contents cryptic yet comforting. Rob Roy's words, few though they were, served as a tether to the wild beauty of the Highlands and the adventures that had forged Frank into the man he now was. Each letter was a reminder of the debt he owed to the land and its people. As the years passed, Frank found himself becoming an unexpected advocate for understanding between England and Scotland. In drawing rooms and business meetings alike, he spoke of the honor and courage he had witnessed, painting vivid pictures of a people too often misunderstood. His words carried the weight of experience, bridging the gap between two worlds that had long stood apart. The transformation from carefree youth to responsible businessman and husband was not always easy. There were nights when Frank would wake, the echo of bagpipes in his ears, the taste of Highland air on his tongue. But Diana would be there, her hand in his, a reminder of the bridge they had built between two worlds. In quiet evenings, by the warm glow of the hearth, Frank would take out his journal. Quill in hand, he would write, preserving the memories of his extraordinary journey. Each word was a tribute to the people he had met, the battles fought, the lessons learned. As the pages filled, Frank realized he was not just recording history, but keeping alive a way of life that was fading like the last embers of a dying fire. The journal became more than a record. It was a legacy, a testament to a time of great change and the power of understanding. As Frank closed the leather-bound book each night, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The spirit of the Highlands and the extraordinary characters who had shaped his life would live on through his words. As he penned the final pages of his journal, Frank reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The naive young man who had first set foot in the Highlands was gone, replaced by someone wiser, more compassionate, and deeply connected to two worlds. He had found love, purpose, and a sense of belonging that transcended the boundaries of nation and clan. The story of Rob Roy, the rising, and the transformation of the Highlands would be told for generations to come. But for Frank, it was more than just a tale of adventure and intrigue. It was the story of how a man found himself in the most unexpected of places, and how the bonds forged in times of strife could last a lifetime. As he closed the journal for the last time, Frank felt a sense of completion. The chapter of his life that had begun in uncertainty and danger had come to an end, but the lessons learned and the connections made would endure. With Diana by his side and the memory of the Highlands forever in his heart, Frank looked to the future with hope and determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.